As a former pension fund CEO and investment trainer, the most painful retirement mistake that I see is not retiring too early or with too little money. It's retiring too late with more savings than you actually need. If you're in your 50s or 60s and live in Europe or the UK, in this video, I'll give you 5 reasons to retire as soon as you can. And I'll show you why making the money work can be easier than you think. But fair warning, one of the reasons that we'll cover is also why some people should not retire too early. Okay, to appreciate the first reason, meet my neighbor Karina. She spent her career as a high-powered executive, working for some of the biggest companies in Latvia. She was always active, going to the gym, taking care of herself, and she had a clear vision for retirement, to travel as much as possible. But Karina was financially responsible. She wanted to build more savings, so she waited until 67 to retire. And she had a few great years after that traveling around the globe, until one winter day at age 70, when she slipped on some ice, fell and broke her hip. Karina recovered, but her mobility is now limited, she has chronic pain, and her active traveling days are largely over. Now, to be sure, she still benefits from her large retirement savings, but it's very likely her savings will outlast her, and I suspect she would much prefer to have a few extra years of travel instead. The trouble is, retirement statistics are deceptive. Yes, if you make it to 65, on average, Europeans spend another 20 years in retirement. And that seems like plenty of time to travel and pursue your hobbies. But if you look at Eurostat data, the average health span, meaning the number of healthy years that you get at 65, is less than a decade. So that's 20 years in retirement, but fewer than 10 of them healthy. And this is only the average. Any of us could have a bad fall, a stroke, or another health issue that restricts our ability to enjoy retirement. So if your finances are in decent shape, and if you have big plans for retirement, then retiring earlier rather than later might be smart. But of course, not everybody does have big plans, which brings us to the second reason to retire early. Let me introduce you to 2 people, Hal and Martin. Hal Nevis was my host dad when I landed as an international student at Reed College in Oregon 2 decades ago. A retired doctor and former Air Force pilot, Hal was one of the happiest, most motivated retirees I've ever known. Over the decades that I knew him, he got a master's degree from my university. He ran a film festival, mentored dozens of international students, hosted countless dinner parties, and traveled extensively to see friends all over the world. To me, Hal was a shining example of how I'd love to live my retirement. But now meet Martin, the dad of a friend of mine. He was a successful corporate salesman for 40 years, but he got tired of it and retired at 62. The thing is, Martin never developed any interests outside his work. So when he retired, he mostly sat on the couch, watched TV, and read the newspaper. He got grumpier, his health got worse, and within 5 years, he passed away. Now, to me, Martin is a clear example of what can happen if you retire with no plan for what you will do. Because the second reason to retire as soon as you can is that life is rich and diverse, and there are so many wonderful experiences to have, so many worthwhile ways to spend your time. If you have a vision for things that you would love to explore, projects that you would love to contribute to, then retirement can be the best part of your life. But this is the warning I mentioned at the start. If you don't have any strong interests or plans, you might be better off staying employed for a little bit while you try out some new hobbies and find something that will make you excited to get up in the morning. Just don't wait too long, because there might be another clock ticking for you. Which brings me to the third reason to retire as soon as possible. There's something I've noticed in my family and the families of my friends. Most of us grew up in the late Soviet Union, or in the first years after it fell apart. And back then, women retired at the early age of 55. So most of our grandmas were retired and they spent tons of time with us. My grandma basically raised me as much as my parents did. We had a very close relationship. But today, among my friends, almost none of our parents are retired. They can still be wonderful grandparents, but they get way less time with their grandkids. And here's the thing, you might be thinking, well, I'll spend more time with my grandkids when I retire. But that window can close very quickly. There's only a short period when kids are actually interested in spending time with their grandparents. Afterwards, you're lucky to get a visit for lunch once every few months. Now, of course, grandkids are just one example of the third reason to retire as soon as possible, which is time with friends and family. The Harvard study of adult development shows one of the key predictors of happiness in old age is having close, high-quality personal relationships. And relationships take time, whether it's for a trip to the countryside with an old friend, lunch with your children to talk over their life problems, or volunteering at a local charity where you can make new connections. But of course, these three reasons are not enough to justify retiring if your finances are not ready. Which brings me to the fourth reason to retire as soon as possible, which, to be fair, does not apply to everyone. If you're in your 50s or 60s with zero savings, this is not relevant. But many of my older investing students discover this as a pleasant surprise. For example, Elise was 63 and tired of her 9-to-5 job, but she felt that she had to keep working because based on her lifestyle and expenses, she needed 2,000 euros per month in investment income on top of her state pension. And her portfolio simply wasn't big enough yet to support that. But Elise was dealing with a toxic workplace and her elderly parents had health problems. And it came to a point where she just didn't want to go on working. So I encouraged her to take a real hard look at her situation and ask a critical question. That 2,000 euros per month, what are you actually buying with it? And when she thought about it, she realized a lot of it was the cost of having that high-stress job. She had a nice apartment in the city center near her work. She bought fancy clothes to look nice at work. She got food deliveries from Uber because she was often too exhausted to cook. And when Elise sat down and visualized her daily life in retirement, she realized she'd be just as happy living on the outskirts of the city near a big park where rent could be half of what she was paying. And if there was no time pressure, she would love to cook her own meals. Basically, Elise realized she could easily get by with 1,000 euros per month on top of her state pension instead of 2,000. And that means instead of needing over 500,000 invested, the 300,000 she already had would be more than enough. That was the trigger which really took a lot of stress and money pressure off Elise's shoulders. And she said, okay, I'm pretty much ready to retire. So this is the fourth reason to consider retiring sooner rather than later. You might not need as much retirement income as you assume. Really start to think about it. If you had complete freedom of time, if you didn't have to commute to work or dress to impress your colleagues, if you had the ability to choose your own schedule, would it be worth it to downsize to a smaller apartment or maybe sell your car? Or cut back on your eating out? Because here's the other thing. We spend most of our lives being disciplined and financially responsible and building up our savings, and that's a hard habit to break. But as retirement approaches, the time that you have remaining is likely more valuable than the money you have remaining. Now, of course, this doesn't mean you can be irresponsible financially. You need to know your numbers. And what's more, all of this only works if your savings are working for you. Which brings me to the fifth reason why many people should consider retiring sooner. This is also the reason Elise enrolled in my training. You see, here in Europe, many people over 50 do have substantial savings, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands put aside for retirement, but the money is just sitting in the bank or in very low-risk investments like government bonds. And the problem is, once you hit retirement and stop putting new money in, your cash in the bank is going in a straight line down, eventually all the way down to zero. Plus, everything gets more expensive all the time. I mean, 3% inflation on 100,000 saved means 3,000 euros in value that disappear every year. Like, that's a nice vacation that gets wasted because of rising prices. When you multiply that by 10 or 20 years of retirement, it's no wonder that many retirees really struggle. But on the flip side, this is also a big opportunity if you learn how to invest your money properly. Now, a lot of older Europeans find investing to be a bit scary. They think it means things like trading or crypto or financial gambling. And to be clear, even responsible investing does always involve some degree of risk. But as a former pension fund CEO, I can tell you this. There are moderate, balanced investments with a responsible level of risk that have a very high likelihood of significantly extending your retirement runway. That is exactly what I teach my students like Elise. This is what makes retiring in comfort a reality for so many people. Instead of a straight line down to zero, investing bends the line back up so that retirement savings can last for decades. And in fact, depending on how the market does, many retirees reach the end of their lives with more in their portfolio than at the time of retiring. So the fifth reason to retire as soon as possible is this. If you put a good system in place to protect and grow your life savings, making the money work, gets much easier. Now, of course, if you're new to investing for retirement, it can all seem a bit confusing. You need to figure out which investments will actually grow your savings and which are just risky gambles, what investment platform is safe to use, and how to protect your savings from market crashes. Well, if that's interesting, I've put together a step-by-step training on this exact topic. To check it out, just follow the first link in the description of this video.